today we're going to have a casual chat about both Valyrian Steel as well as one of the most underused warging abilities in the series so far, and how possibly the two of them could interact. And sadly, no, I'm not talking about the ability to warg into Valyrian Steel swords. I don't think you can actually do that. But you can warg into fish, which some of you might be going, what the heck is he talking about? Fish? How does that relate to anything? How is that relevant? Well, it might not be, or it might be. And it might be very specifically in the case of what looks to be one of the more powerful wargs in our series, Euron Greyjoy. And I don't think it's necessarily fully confirmed that he's a warg, but it's often speculated with all of his flying dreams in the past, and many people even speculate the only way that he could have an entire crew of people with their tongues cut out running a boat is if he's actually on some level or another warging into his crew so that they can all know what to do, because to run a boat you kind of need to be able to communicate. There's also the common fan theory that Euron is warging into the Dusky Woman, so, while it's not confirmed, I do think it is worth speculating and is already heavily speculated that Euron has warging abilities. Now, I don't just assume that Euron is warging a fish because he's an Ironborn and they're out at sea a lot and I'm doing a terrible stereotype on the Ironborn. No, it's actually confirmed in the text that you can warg fish. In fact, it's brought up 3 separate times in 3 separate books. Old Nan in A Game of Thrones says that the children knew the songs of the trees, that they could fly like birds and swim like fish. And since we've never seen a child of the forest flying when they're not warging, I assume, and you should probably also assume, that she's talking about warging into birds and warging into fish. Then in A Clash of Kings we get the line, supposedly the Greenseers had the power over the beasts of the wood and the birds of the trees, even fish. So it's mentioned twice now in 2 books that, yeah, you can warg into fish. Then, to make it 3 for 3 in A Storm of Swords, it's said that the Greenseers were more than that. They were wargs as well, as you are, and the greatest of them could wear the skins of any beast that flies or swims. So, cool, fish warging confirmed, and it seems pretty likely that if you have an Ironborn warg, there's a decent chance they would end up bonding with and warging a fish or some other beast of the sea. Now, where Valyrian Steel comes into all of this is the fact that when I was on a recent live stream on Something to Talk About, we were chatting about all the Valyrian Steel weapons, and it was brought up how many of them are in the hands of Ironborn. Now, this does make a lot of sense, because obviously the Ironborn love to raid, and if you're raiding and stealing things, the most valuable thing that you could be stealing is a sword made of Valyrian Steel, and no one really goes and raids the Ironborn to take their stuff, at least as far as we see, so generally, once you get an Ironborn taking a Valyrian Steel sword back to the Iron Islands, there's a decent chance it's going to remain there and in the hands of an Ironborn. One of the other things that was instantly brought up after that is the fact that, okay, if you have a bunch of Ironborn rocking around with Valyrian Steel weapons, and they're out there on boats all the time, every time one of their boats is sunk, there's a decent chance that a Valyrian Steel weapon might get lost. And with that in mind, over the course of history, it seems likely that there are quite a few Valyrian Steel weapons that have ended up on the bottom of the ocean in shipwrecks somewhere off the coast of Westeros. The other thing that's really interesting about this is that Euron seems to be in possession of just a crazy amount of Valyrian Steel. He has a bunch of daggers that he pours out at the Kingsmoot to basically show his power and show all the Ironborn that he's worth following. Then, in addition to this, in the Forsaken chapter of the Winds of Winter, he is revealed to have an entire suit of Valyrian Steel armor, which is just a ton of Valyrian Steel, and something that hasn't been seen since before the Doom. Now, something we should obviously note about this is that Euron has been to Valyria. This is basically confirmed in not only 1 but 2 different ways. In the Forsaken chapter, when Aeron sees that he has this entire suit of Valyrian Steel, he says, "Euron did not lie. He has been to Valyria. No wonder he's mad." In addition to this in-book confirmation that we get, George R.R. Martin was asked at one point, what sort of magic is preventing people from going to Valyria considering no one's been to Valyria since the Doom, and he had the following to say.
I don't know about magic, but there are people who have gone to Valyria, and, one of them is pretty present in the book, Euron with his horn, which is definitely of Valyrian manufacturing. You may find out more about Valyria and who's gone there, and some people go there and don't get to leave again, though.
So considering that we have confirmation both in and out of book that Euron has indeed been to Valyria, I would say there's no real reason to speculate that he's lied about this. Some way or another, Euron got into Valyria, and there's a decent chance that that's where he got a bunch of his Valyrian steel. Now, I have sort of questioned how he got a suit of armor that actually fits him, because, armor generally doesn't just randomly happen to fit like it would in a video game if you find some armor. You sort of have to get that stuff custom made. I do definitely wonder on some level or another if Euron has someone who is capable of reforging Valyrian steel that he has captured and brought aboard his boat, in the same way he's captured warlocks and brought them aboard his boat, and in the same way he's got his crew there with their tongues cut out. It is possible, in my opinion, that he has someone who is, like Tobo Mat, able to reforge and reshape Valyrian steel, but that's a bit of speculation that maybe you can add a bit of info to down in the comments if you have any evidence for that, but that's not really the main point we're talking about today. The main point that I want to talk about today is, if you did in fact have someone who was capable of reshaping Valyrian steel, well then maybe the ability to warg into fish and go scouring around the seafloor and bringing up from shipwrecks, or even from in the Doom of Valyria itself, because, a lot of that stuff is now underwater. Could Euron be using his ability to warg sea creatures, squids, possibly even kraken, or other types of fish, to essentially be a Westerosi scuba diving treasure hunter? Now, as far as I'm aware, we don't have full-on evidence of this or any lines that directly point to this in the books yet, but there is this thing that goes on where every different book that comes out, George introduces new things that then become relevant in that book. So minor things like Euron's ability to, say, be warging fish to get all his Valyrian steel isn't something that would necessarily be foreshadowed more than it's been with those lines that we already covered about warging fish, right? George could definitely introduce the idea that this is what Euron's been doing in the next book, and no one would really be able to complain or say that that wasn't well set up, because he's done enough of the setup that he would need to in order to establish the ability to warg fish, and Euron definitely has a very suspicious amount of Valyrian steel. In addition to this, there is the fact that we might need even more Valyrian steel swords to fight off the others if that is what indeed is going to happen by A Dream of Spring. So could someone like Bran end up going scuba diving using some fish or some krakens or whatever the heck you want to use in order to be grabbing these Valyrian steel swords from deep down in these shipwrecks? I admit this would definitely be a little bit out of left field and is, as I said, just more of a casual fun chat because I think the idea of warging fish is pretty interesting, especially with all the setup that we have of, merfolk and squishers, and something happened to Patchface when he was deep down under the waves, so did a warg in their second life inside of a fish somehow jump into Patchface, therefore, resurrecting him and becoming some weird mind meld with this guy who used to be Patchface? Who really knows? But I did want to, just as I said, bring up the idea of, is there any possible use of warging fish that you can see going forward in these books? Do you think there's a decent chance that anyone has been warging fish in the past, and this could possibly be relevant in any way or another? Do you think that there's any chance that any Ironborn who have acquired Valyrian steel swords in the past may have done so by having one of their ancestors who had some warging ability doing the whole scuba diving treasure hunting thing? Also, how would you feel if it was revealed that Euron's way of getting into Valyria was in some way or another warging some sort of sea creature and scouring the seas of Valyria and all of the ruins to get enough Valyrian steel to make the daggers and the armor that he seems to already have? Or is all this setup about warging fish and sea creatures going to not ever actually relate to Valyrian steel at all? Is Euron potentially going to try summon a kraken with his blood magic ritual that he seems to be setting up so that he can just warg into that and cause massive amounts of destruction? That's a bit more of a straightforward theory that's been talked about a lot before, but maybe that is in the end just what's going to happen. In any case, is there any other thing that you could do with warging these fish that I haven't covered in this video? Definitely let me know down in the comments, and as I said, this was just a fun, casual chat. I don't really have a deep, well-researched theory around all of this, but I did think it was fun to talk about, and I'll be back to talk about something else very soon.